The storm had been building since morning. By the time I turned onto the old forest road, the sky had gone the color of ash, and the snow was coming down sideways, not dramatic, not cinematic, just cold and relentless and indifferent to everything beneath it. I'd driven that road maybe 200 times. I knew every bend, every place where the ice gathered, every tree line where the wind came through wrong. After enough winters alone up here, you stop seeing the landscape. It just becomes background noise. That night, I almost let her become background noise too. She was beside the road, maybe 40 feet ahead of my headlights, half buried in a drift against the embankment. From inside the truck she looked like a clump of frozen brush, maybe a rock, maybe nothing. I don't know what made me slow down. I wasn't looking for anything. I hadn't been looking for much of anything in a long time. But something made me ease off the gas, and in that half second before I would have driven past, I saw her eyes catch my headlights. Just for a moment, just a flicker, I stopped the truck. I remember the cold hitting me when I opened the door. That particular kind of mountain cold that doesn't just touch your skin, it goes straight through you, like the air itself is warning you about something. My boots broke through the surface crust with every step. The snow was up past my ankles before I'd taken 3 strides. She was still there when I reached her, a Pallas's cat, a Manul. Most people have never seen one in the wild. Most wildlife photographers haven't either. They are ancient-looking animals, thick, dense fur the color of winter grass, flat faces, eyes that seem to carry some older kind of intelligence. They look like something that belongs to a different century entirely. This one looked like she belonged to another world. One side of her body was frozen to the ground. A thin sheet of ice had formed over her left flank and shoulder, pinning her where she'd collapsed. Her breathing was shallow, barely visible. Her coat was matted with frost. She wasn't moving. I crouched down beside her. And the second I reached out, she opened her eyes, not slowly, not weakly, wide open, fully alert, fully present in a way that made no sense for an animal that close to gone. And before I could pull my hand back, she grabbed my glove, both paws, gripping, not slashing, not striking, gripping, like a child grabbing a hand in the dark. I stayed completely still. My heart was doing something it hadn't done in a long time. Not fear exactly, something older than fear, something that made the storm feel very far away. She held on for several seconds. Then she let out a sound I'd never heard a wild Manul make. Not a hiss, not a growl, something quieter and somehow much worse, like effort, like the very last of something being spent. I worked as carefully and quickly as I could, breaking the ice around her with my gloved hands, trying not to move her more than necessary. She flinched when I touched her left side. The cold had gotten deep into her. I could feel it even through my gloves, the wrong kind of stillness in her muscles. I got my jacket off and wrapped it around her. She didn't fight me. That alone should have told me something. A wild Manul that doesn't fight you isn't being gentle. It means there's nothing left to fight with. I had her in the truck within 4 minutes. Heated blankets from the emergency kit in my back seat. Heat turned up as high as it would go. I was already dialing the wildlife clinic with one hand while I drove, the truck sliding once on the ice before catching. She lay on the seat beside me, wrapped in the blanket, and for the entire drive she didn't look away from me once, not at the windshield, not at the storm outside, at me. There's a specific kind of attention wild animals give you when they're afraid. Quick, scanning, looking for exits. This wasn't that. This was something focused and searching and so direct it made it hard to concentrate on the road. Every time I slowed for a bend, she trembled harder. Not from cold. I didn't understand that yet, but I noticed it, and something about it wouldn't let me go. The veterinarian on call met me at the side entrance. Young woman, calm, efficient. She had the Manul on the examination table within 60 seconds and was already running through vitals with the quiet focus of someone who has seen bad things and learned not to show it. Mild hypothermia, dehydration, exhaustion running deep into her system, and then the vet paused. She set down her instrument and looked at the Manul carefully for a long moment without speaking. Then she looked at me. "She's recently given birth," she said quietly. I didn't say anything. The kittens would have been newborns, days old at most. The room felt different suddenly, smaller. "Where did you find her exactly?" I drove back to that spot 2 hours later, after they'd stabilized her enough to rest. I stood on the side of the road in the dark with my flashlight and looked at the tree line and the snow and the silence beyond it. Nothing moved, no sound except wind. I stood there until I couldn't feel my hands anymore. Then I drove home, sat at my kitchen table, and stared at my phone for a long time, without calling anyone. I thought about the grip on my glove. I thought about the way she'd trembled when I slowed down. I thought about newborn kittens, somewhere out in that storm, in the dark, in the cold, waiting. The next morning I arrived at the clinic before it opened. The vet met me at the door with an expression that told me something had already happened. "She was in her enclosure 20 minutes ago," she said. "Was?" I said. She pointed toward the parking area. The manual was standing beside my truck, waiting, and as I walked toward her, slowly, quietly, she turned away from me and took 3 steps toward the mountain road, then stopped and looked back. I want to be honest about what I was thinking in that moment. I was thinking about liability, about wildlife regulations, about the fact that a recovering wild animal had just walked out of a licensed clinic and was standing in a parking lot in the middle of a snowstorm looking at me like I was supposed to understand something. I was thinking about all of that. And then she took another step toward the tree line, stopped, and looked back at me again, and I went inside and grabbed my pack. The vet tried to stop me, not harshly. She understood something was happening that didn't fit neatly into protocol. But she had responsibilities, and I was about to follow a half-frozen wild Pallas's cat into a mountain forest during a worsening blizzard with no GPS signal and no backup. "At least take the emergency kit," she said finally. I already had it. The manual was still in the parking lot when I came back out. She watched me cross toward her without moving. Up close in the gray morning light she looked even smaller than she had the night before, dense and low to the ground, her thick fur pressed flat by the wind, her eyes that particular pale amber that always makes Manuls look like they're seeing something slightly beyond what you can see. She turned and walked. I followed. The forest road disappeared within 10 minutes. After that it was just trees and snow and her moving ahead of me through it. She wasn't fast. She couldn't be, not yet. Every 30 or 40 steps she would slow, and I could see the effort it cost her just to keep upright. Her left side still carried stiffness from the cold. Twice she stumbled slightly and caught herself. Both times she kept moving. I've photographed animals for 23 years. I've watched predators run through injury, mothers defend nests with broken wings, bulls crossed frozen rivers in conditions that should have stopped them cold. I know what survival instinct looks like. I know the particular quality of movement that comes from something ancient and biological pushing past the body's warnings. This wasn't quite that. Survival instinct moves fast when it can. It's urgent and self-focused, and it doesn't look back. She kept looking back. Every time I fell more than 15 feet behind, she would stop and wait, not impatiently, just waiting, making sure I was still there. The storm was getting worse. Visibility had dropped to maybe 40 feet. The temperature had fallen sharply since morning, and the snow was no longer soft. It was granular and wind-driven, and it found every gap in my collar and cuffs without difficulty. I checked my phone. No signal. I checked my compass. We'd moved northeast, deeper into the slope, gaining elevation slowly. I thought about turning back twice. Both times I looked at her and didn't. There are decisions you make in your life that you can explain fully and clearly afterward. You can list the reasons, trace the logic, show your work. And then there are decisions that you make in some quieter part of yourself that doesn't use language, and you understand them only much later, if ever. Following her was the second kind. She collapsed at the 38-minute mark, not dramatically. She simply stopped moving, and her front legs folded, and she went down into the snow on her chest. Her sides were heaving. She'd pushed herself far past what her body had available, and for a moment I genuinely didn't know if she was going to get back up. I crouched beside her, didn't touch her, just crouched there in the snow and waited. Her breathing steadied slowly. Then she lifted her head, looked at me, looked ahead, and stood up. I heard them before I saw the den. We'd stopped beside a collapsed rockfall at the base of a granite shelf, fallen trees piled against the stone, debris half buried under snow, the whole structure sagging under the weight of ice that had built up over what looked like several days of weather. It looked like nothing. It looked like wreckage, and then, faint, almost swallowed completely by the wind, a sound, high, thin, barely there. I held my breath. There it was again. 4 voices maybe fewer. It was impossible to tell. The sound was so weak it could have been the structure settling, could have been wind finding a gap in the debris. But the manual heard it too, and I watched her entire body change in the space of a single second. The exhaustion, the careful controlled movement, all of it dropped away instantly. She was at the den entrance before I'd fully stood up. The opening was narrow and half collapsed, barely large enough for her to push through. She disappeared inside without hesitating. I could hear her in there. Soft sounds, chirping almost. Nothing like the sounds wild manuals make in wildlife footage. This was quieter, lower, private. I got down on my knees in the snow and looked in with my flashlight. 4 kittens, piled together in the deepest corner of the den, pressed against each other for warmth that was rapidly running out. They were impossibly small, newborns, just as the vet had said, eyes still sealed, ears still folded flat against their tiny skulls. Their fur was damp, and their movements were slow and weak in that particular way that means the body is conserving everything it has left for the single task of staying alive. The mother had pressed herself around them immediately, curling, covering, pouring whatever warmth remained in her into them. She looked at me over her shoulder. I don't know how long the den had been collapsed. Long enough that the cold had gotten deep into the space. Long enough that without intervention, the math was not going to work out. I started digging, carefully, not pulling debris randomly, but working methodically, testing each piece before moving it, listening for sounds of shifting above. The structure was unstable in ways I couldn't fully assess, and I knew it. But I kept going. The mother watched every movement I made. Not with fear anymore, with a focus so complete it felt almost like pressure, like being supervised by something that understood exactly what was at stake and was deciding, second by second, whether to trust me with it. I worked for nearly 2 hours. The 3rd kitten I lifted out was the one that scared me. The other 2 had responded when I moved them, weak but present, squirming faintly, protesting in tiny voices. This one lay completely still in my palms, no movement, eyes sealed shut, mouth slightly open. I pressed my thumb gently against its side and felt the faintest flutter, barely a heartbeat, barely a breath. I tucked it inside my jacket, against my chest, and kept working. The mother made a sound I hadn't heard her make before, low and continuous, not distress exactly. Something more complicated than that. I didn't look up. 12 minutes later, inside my jacket, against my sternum, something moved. A twitch first, then a push, then a tiny voice, no louder than a whisper, complaining about the darkness and the warmth and the heartbeat that wasn't its mother's. I stopped digging for a moment and just breathed. Getting all 4 kittens out took another 40 minutes. By the time I had them secured, 3 inside my jacket, 1 wrapped in the emergency thermal sheet in my pack, the storm had fully closed in around us. The Manu walked beside me the entire way back, not ahead anymore, beside me. Occasionally she pressed briefly against my leg, steady contact for a few steps, then separated again. I don't know what to call that. I've thought about it many times since. The drive to the clinic was quiet. The kittens made small sounds inside my jacket. The mother sat on the seat and watched the road. The veterinarian met us at the door and stopped completely when she saw what I was carrying. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, she brought you to them. It wasn't a question. Later, after the kittens had been examined and warmed and placed with the mother in an expanded enclosure, the vet found me in the hallway sitting on a bench with my coat still on, not quite ready to drive home yet. She sat down beside me. "I want to tell you something," she said. The kittens were maybe 6 hours from gone. The den temperature was critical. She'd been away from them since yesterday, however long it took her to get out to the road and collapse there. She paused. She didn't leave them to save herself. I want you to understand that. She left them to find help. The hallway was very quiet. "In 20 years, the vet said, I have never seen a wild Manul behave this way toward a human. I started visiting every day. At first I told myself it was to monitor the kitten's progress, to make sure the recovery was going correctly, to be useful in some practical sense. I brought supplies the clinic needed. I helped with feeding logistics. I stayed in my lane and behaved like a responsible adult with a reasonable and explainable reason to be there. By the 3rd week I stopped explaining it to myself at all. The mother knew me on sight now. From the moment I came through the door she would orient toward me, not rushing, not performing, just acknowledging, settling slightly. The particular quality of stillness that means an animal has decided you are not a threat, which in a wild Manul is not a small thing. She let me near the kittens. I can't fully describe what that felt like. I've spent decades at careful distance from wild animals, respecting the line, understanding what it costs them when that line gets crossed. To have one choose to erase it, not out of domesticity, not out of dependence, but out of something that looked remarkably like trust, was something I didn't have a category for. I called my daughter for the first time in 8 months. She picked up on the second ring. The weeks passed quietly. The kittens grew. They began to look like small versions of their mother, dense and flat-faced and watchful, with those pale ancient eyes. They tumbled over each other in the enclosure, and stalked imaginary prey along the baseboards, and climbed things they absolutely should not have been climbing. I photographed them every day. I photographed their mother too, really looked at her through a lens for the first time, properly, with attention. There's a stillness to Manul's that photographs beautifully if you have the patience to wait for it. She would sit at the edge of the enclosure window in the late afternoon light, and look out at the mountains with an expression that I can only describe as remembering something. It was the best work I'd done in years. I didn't fully notice that until my daughter said something about it on the phone one evening. She'd been looking at the images online. "Dad," she said, "these are really something." Then the Wildlife Authority letter arrived. Standard language, polite, clear. The kittens had reached sufficient development for the relocation protocol to begin. Protected mountain territory had been designated. Timeline, 4 to 6 weeks. I sat with that letter for a long time. I understood it. I agreed with it, in the part of me that thinks in policy and outcomes and what's correct for wild animals. The mountains were where they belonged. The mountains were where they'd been trying to get back to all along. But I'd stopped being only the part of me that thinks in policy. I arrived at the clinic on a Tuesday evening in the 6th week. The enclosure was quiet in a way that felt different immediately. The mother was pacing, not her usual slow patrol, but tight and fast, back and forth along the rear wall. The kittens were clustered together watching her. One of the clinic staff met me in the hallway. Her face said it before she did. "One of the kittens is gone," she said, "the smallest one. We don't know how. There's a service door that wasn't latching properly, we think. Security footage is being reviewed now." Outside, the temperature had dropped below 0. I was already moving toward the door. The security footage showed a gap of 4 minutes. That's all it took. 4 minutes between a staff member's last check and the moment the service door drifted open in the wind. The camera caught a small shape moving low and fast across the bottom of the frame, purposeful in the way young wild animals are purposeful, without any understanding of what waits outside. Then snow, then darkness, then nothing. The clinic director pulled me aside with the careful tone of someone managing expectations. "The temperature is -11, she said quietly. "With wind chill it's considerably worse. A kitten that age, alone out there." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. We split into 3 groups. 2 staff members took the drainage areas along the eastern fence line. The clinic director covered the access road and the outbuildings near the supply entrance. I took the forest edge, the tree line that ran along the northern boundary of the property, where the mountain began its slow rise and the darkness between the pines was complete. I had a flashlight and the emergency kit and the particular sick feeling of someone who has already lost something once and is not prepared to lose it again. The cold was immediate and total. My breath came in short, visible clouds. The snow underfoot had crusted overnight into a surface that cracked loudly with every step, the kind of noise that carries in winter silence and announces you to everything within 100 meters. I moved as quietly as I could, which wasn't quiet enough. An hour passed, then 90 minutes. The radio crackled twice. Nothing found, nothing found. The temperature was still dropping. I'd covered the full length of the tree line twice and doubled back through the equipment shed and checked the spaces beneath the loading dock and found nothing except darkness and cold and the particular helplessness of searching for something very small in a very large night. I sat down in the snow at the edge of the parking area, just for a moment, just to breathe. The clinic windows cast long yellow rectangles across the ground. Inside one of them I could see the mother, still pacing, still tight and fast along the rear wall, her silhouette moving back and forth behind the glass with the relentless rhythm of an animal coming apart at the edges. I watched her for a while. Then the door opened behind me, and she was there. I don't know how she got out. Somebody had opened the clinic's side door briefly, a staff member stepping out to check in with me, and she'd come through it low and fast before anyone could react. She was in the parking lot before the door had swung fully closed. She stopped a few feet from me. We looked at each other in the dark. She was trembling, not from cold. Her coat was dense enough for temperatures far worse than this. Something else, something that didn't have a clean biological name. I stayed completely still. She crossed the distance between us slowly, 4 steps, 5, and then she did something she had never done before. She stepped onto my lap and stayed there, not curling, not settling. just standing, oriented outward, her small body pressed against my chest, shaking in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. I put one hand very carefully against her side. She didn't move away. We sat there together in the snow in the dark and said nothing, because there was nothing to say, and somehow that was the most honest conversation I'd had with another living thing in years. She heard it before I did. I felt it first, the change in her body, sudden and complete, the trembling stopping all at once and every muscle going still and focused in that way that means a predator has locked onto something. Her ears swiveled forward and slightly left. I followed her gaze. Across the parking area, past the equipment shed, past the secondary fence line, an old storage structure I'd walked past twice during the search, low-roofed, half-collapsed on one side, the kind of outbuilding that accumulates decades of disuse and becomes essentially invisible. I'd noted it and dismissed it. Too obvious, too exposed. She was already moving toward it. The door was frozen shut, not locked, just sealed by ice along the bottom edge where meltwater had refrozen in the gap. I worked the edge with my boot and felt it give slightly. She was beside me now, pressed against the door, her nose working rapidly along the gap at the bottom. I hit it once with my shoulder and it swung inward, cold air, the smell of old wood and ice and something underneath both of those things, something small and alive and frightened. I swept the flashlight across the interior, broken shelving, old equipment under tarps. A collapsed section of roofing in the far corner where snow had come through and built up in a low drift against the wall. And then, very faint, a scratching sound, irregular, weak, coming from beneath the collapsed shelving near the far wall, where a gap between fallen boards had created a narrow space no wider than my hand. Getting to it was not straightforward. The flooring near the far wall had partially rotted through, and in the cold it had become brittle in ways I couldn't fully assess until I was standing on it. I moved carefully, testing each step, feeling the give and groan beneath my boots. The collapsed shelving had brought down part of the wall structure with it. There was ice water pooled beneath the debris, and exposed wiring running along the baseboard that I needed to stay away from. The mother was behind me. She'd come in without hesitation and was navigating the debris more efficiently than I was, low and fluid, finding the stable surfaces by instinct. She stopped at the edge of the fallen shelving and pressed her face to the gap. The scratching sound came again, slower now, more irregular. I got down onto my stomach on the cold floor and reached into the gap with my flashlight. There, pressed into the corner where the wall met the floor, wedged between a fallen board and the ice-cold concrete, the smallest kitten, barely moving, one eye partially open and glassy with cold. Its coat was damp where it had been lying against the ice water pooling beneath the debris. It was alive, barely, but alive. Reaching it required removing 3 sections of shelving in the right sequence without destabilizing what was above them. I worked slowly. The mother stood at the edge of the debris and watched every movement with an attention so focused it was almost physical. She made no sound. She didn't pace or chirp or interfere. She simply watched with the complete and absolute trust of something that has run out of options and chosen, in that absence of options, to believe in you entirely. I don't know if I've ever felt more responsible for anything in my life. The second shelf section shifted wrong when I moved it. A groan from above, a crack, debris dust falling from the compromised ceiling. I froze, held completely still for 10 seconds, 15. The structure settled. I kept going. My hand closed around the kitten at the 11-minute mark. I felt it against my palm, impossibly light, the particular fragile weight of something very young and very cold. I drew it out slowly, carefully, keeping it level, keeping my movement smooth. Outside the gap the mother was there immediately, nose touching the kitten before I'd fully stood up, reading it in that rapid, focused way, her whole body reorganizing around the information she was gathering. I tucked the kitten against my chest and moved toward the door. I was 4 steps from the exit when the rear section of the structure came down. Not catastrophically, not the whole roof, not a collapse that would have mattered to someone moving at normal speed. But the rear wall buckled inward under the ice load, and the shelving unit nearest the back dropped hard onto the flooring, and the sound of it in that small cold space was enormous. I was already outside. The mother took the kitten from me in the way wild mothers take things, not gently, exactly, but with a certainty and completeness that made gentleness irrelevant. She was on the ground and the kitten was against her, and she was working at it, licking, warming, making those low private sounds I'd first heard in the collapsed den in the mountains. The kitten moved, weakly, slowly, but it moved. One of the clinic staff had heard the structure come down and came running, then the clinic director, then both of the other search teams converging from different directions, flashlights cutting across the parking area, everyone arriving at the same moment to find a woman sitting in the snow, holding a flashlight over a wild Pallas's cat and her kitten, while a man who looked considerably worse than when the evening had started sat beside them saying nothing. One of the younger staff members was crying. The clinic director crouched down and looked at the kitten for a long moment. Then she looked at the mother, then at me. She started to say something and then didn't. Sometimes the thing that's true doesn't need to be said. The kitten spent 2 days on supplemental warming before the vet was satisfied with its temperature regulation. I came both days. The mother had settled in a way I hadn't seen before. Not the alert, watchful stillness of the early weeks, but something deeper and quieter. She would nurse the kittens and then remain stretched out while they climbed over her, tolerating the indignity of 4 increasingly mobile small animals treating her like furniture with the particular patience of a mother who has recently been reminded what the alternative looks like. I sat outside the enclosure and photographed all of it. I wasn't thinking about the photographs as work. I wasn't thinking about them as anything. I was just present, there, watching a family be a family in the specific unhurried way that families are when they feel safe. I hadn't felt safe in a long time. I hadn't really noticed how long until right then. My daughter drove up that weekend. She hadn't been to the mountain cabin in 3 years. She came on a Saturday morning and I met her in the driveway and we stood there for a moment in the thin winter sunlight doing the awkward recalibration that happens when 2 people who love each other have let too much time and silence build up between them. Then she said, "Show me the cats." And just like that, the silence had somewhere to go. She sat beside me outside the enclosure for 2 hours. She didn't say much, neither did I. The mother regarded her with cautious assessment from across the enclosure, ears slightly back, posture neutral, the long, slow evaluation of a wild animal deciding about a new person. After about 40 minutes, the mother settled facing our direction. My daughter noticed. "She's okay with me being here," she said quietly. "Yeah," I said, "she is." We had dinner at the cabin that night for the first time in years. We talked until past midnight, about her life, her work, the years I'd been mostly absent even when I was physically present. About what loneliness does to a person slowly, the way cold does, not all at once, but by degrees, until you've adjusted to a temperature that was never normal and stopped noticing it. I told her about the night in the snow, about the grip on my glove. She listened to all of it without interrupting. "Dad," she said finally, "you sound different." I didn't ask different how. I knew what she meant. Spring came the way mountain spring always does, reluctantly, in stages, with several false starts that fooled nobody. But it came. The kittens changed with it. What had been small and tumbling and dependent began to sharpen into something more directional. They moved differently, more deliberate, less accidental. They watched the enclosure windows with a focus they hadn't had in winter. The mother began leading them to the outdoor access area in the mornings and staying longer each time, sitting in the pale spring sunlight while they investigated every inch of the space with the systematic attention of animals recalibrating to the world they were built for. I watched it happen day by day, watched them becoming what they were always meant to be, and I understood, in the way you understand things when you stop trying to understand them and just let the truth arrive at its own pace, that this was always going to end. That ending was built into the beginning, that the right thing and the hard thing were, in this case, identical. I made peace with it gradually, not all at once, gradually. Then one morning I drove up the clinic road in the early light and saw the director standing outside the entrance with her hands in her coat pockets, and I knew before I got out of the truck. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment with the engine running, then I turned it off and got out. She met me halfway across the parking area. Her expression was careful and soft in equal measure, the expression of someone delivering news they believe is both sad and right. "Sometime before first light," she said, "the outdoor access door. We think she led them out herself." I nodded. "All 5? "All 5, she said. "Healthy, ready." I nodded again. We walked inside together. The enclosure was clean and still and absolutely empty, except, beside the door to the outdoor access, on the floor, sitting neatly against the base of the wall as if it had been deliberately placed there, my glove, the one she'd grabbed that first night in the storm. I stood and looked at it for a long time. The clinic was very quiet around me. Outside, somewhere beyond the tree line, the mountain morning was beginning. The clinic felt different after they left. Not empty in the way a room is empty when nobody's been in it. Empty in the way a room is empty when something that was alive in it is gone. The enclosure had been cleaned and reset, fresh bedding, water bowls rinsed, the outdoor access door latched open the way it always was between residents. It looked exactly as it had before they arrived. That was almost the hardest part. I didn't go back for a week. I told myself I was giving the staff space, told myself there was work to catch up on, equipment to service, the usual accumulation of practical things that pile up when you spend 6 months driving to a wildlife clinic every day instead of doing whatever it was you were supposed to be doing. I sat in the cabin and went through photographs. There were thousands of them, more than I'd realized. I'd been shooting almost daily without fully accounting for it, the way you do when you're doing something for reasons that have nothing to do with output. I went through them slowly, chronologically, starting from the blurred, hurried shots I'd taken that first night at the clinic when my hands were still cold from the storm. The early ones showed her exhaustion, the flatness in her posture, the way her coat had lost its depth in those first days, the careful, measured quality of every movement, an animal spending what it had left with extreme economy. Then the change, gradual and then suddenly obvious, the kittens growing, the enclosure becoming a world, her moving through it with increasing ease, increasing ownership, the particular relaxed authority of a mother whose family is safe. And then, scattered through the later weeks, photographs I barely remembered taking, her watching the mountains through the clinic window in afternoon light, the smallest kitten asleep against her side, one tiny paw curled under its chin, her looking directly into my lens from 3 feet away with those pale amber eyes, fully present, fully calm, fully herself. I sat with that last one for a long time. I called my daughter on a Thursday evening. We'd been talking more regularly since her visit, not dramatically more, not with any announced intention or stated commitment, just more. A call here, a message there, the slow and unforced rebuilding of something that had been let go by degrees and could apparently be recovered the same way. She asked how I was doing. I told her honestly. Something's missing, I said. I know how it sounds. They were wild animals. They were always going to leave. I understood that the whole time. Understanding something doesn't mean it doesn't hurt, she said. I didn't say anything for a moment. No, I said finally. It doesn't. She was quiet too. Then, Dad, do you know what I think? Tell me. I think you'd forgotten how to miss things, and now you remember. I sat with that for a long time after we hung up. She wasn't wrong. The weeks moved. I went back to the clinic eventually, not as a visitor with a specific purpose, but as a volunteer. There was always something useful to do, and the staff had learned my particular skill set over the months and were not inclined to turn away someone willing to show up reliably and work without requiring much management. I photographed other animals, documented recoveries, drove transport routes when the regular drivers weren't available, learned things about wildlife rehabilitation I hadn't known before, practical, unglamorous things about feeding schedules and wound care, and the specific patience required to sit with a frightened animal and simply be a calm presence until the fear finds somewhere to go. I was good at the last one. I had practice. My relationship with my daughter continued to repair itself in the slow, honest way that real repairs happen, not with a single dramatic gesture, but with accumulated small ones, more phone calls, a second visit to the cabin in early summer, longer this time. An evening where she showed me photographs from her life, her apartment, her friends, the work she'd been doing that I'd missed years of by being too far away and too turned inward to ask about. I looked at those photographs with the same attention I gave to the ones through my lens. She noticed. You're actually looking, she said. I'm trying to, I said. She leaned her head briefly against my shoulder in the way she'd done when she was small, and then straightened up and kept talking, and I stayed very still for a moment the way you stay still when something lands on you that you don't want to disturb. Summer passed. Then early fall, that particular northern fall where the light changes quality before the temperature does, going golden and low and long, the kind of light that makes everything it touches look like it's being remembered rather than seen. I was shooting more than I had in years. Real work, focused work, the kind that comes from having something to say rather than just having access to places. A conservation organization had approached me about a long-term project documenting mountain wildlife corridors, the kind of sustained, careful work I'd once done before the years of solo travel had hollowed something out and left competence in place of passion. I said yes. I meant it. I don't know exactly what made me drive that road again. It was a Tuesday in early winter. The first real snow had come the week before, not a storm, just a steady overnight fall that left everything clean and unmarked in the morning. The mountains were white above the tree line. The road was clear, but the verges were deep with it, the same heavy, undisturbed drifts I'd driven past 100 times without stopping. I told myself I was scouting locations for the corridor project. That was true, technically. I drove slowly. The truck's heater was running and the windows were fogged slightly at the edges, and the forest on either side of the road was still and gray, and particular in the way winter forests are. Every individual tree visible, nothing hidden by leaf cover, the whole structure of the place exposed and legible. I passed the spot where I'd found her. I didn't stop. I drove past it and then slowed gradually and sat there in the road for a moment, with no traffic in either direction. Then I backed up. I got out of the truck. The cold hit me the way mountain cold always hits, complete and immediate, no negotiation. I stood on the shoulder of the road where the snow was untouched and looked at the embankment where she'd lain that night, almost a year ago, half buried and barely breathing. There was nothing there now. Just snow, just the embankment and the tree line beyond it and the silence. I stood there for a while, not looking for anything, not expecting anything, just standing in the place where something had started and letting that mean what it meant. The forest was quiet, wind through the upper branches. My own breath, the faint sound of the truck's engine cooling behind me. Then, at the tree line, movement. I noticed it the way you notice things in the wild when you've spent enough years looking, not with your eyes exactly, but with the part of your attention that processes the periphery, that registers the difference between a branch moving in wind and something moving under its own intention. I turned slowly. She was at the edge of the trees, maybe 30 feet away, standing fully still in the way Manul stands still, not frozen, not hiding, but present with an absolute economy of motion, every part of her settled and deliberate. Her coat had thickened for winter into that extraordinary depth that makes them look carved from the landscape itself. She was healthy, strong, completely herself. She was looking directly at me. I didn't move. I didn't reach for my camera. I just looked back. And in that particular suspension, two living things regarding each other across a snowy clearing in the early winter silence, I felt something I had not felt in so long that I had genuinely stopped expecting to feel it again. Simply present, simply here, not managing distance, not working, not being alone in the practiced, deliberate way I'd turned loneliness into a kind of discipline. Just here. They came out of the trees one at a time. The first emerged from the brush to her left, already nearly her size, the dense winter coat making the family resemblance unmistakable. Then a second from the right, a third close behind, moving with that fluid low-gravity quality that Manuls carry even as adults. The fourth came last, stepping into the clearing and stopping beside the mother with the ease of an animal entirely comfortable in its world. 4 of them, all of them. I stood at the road's edge and looked at 5 wild Pallas's cats standing in the snow at the edge of the winter forest, and I did not trust myself to move or speak or do anything that might end the moment before it was ready to end on its own. The smallest one, I was certain it was the smallest one, though I couldn't have explained how I knew, sat down in the snow and regarded me with the calm, uninvested curiosity of a young wild animal that has never learned to fear the particular human standing in front of it. Only that one. Only because of the specific and unrepeatable chain of events that had led us here. They stayed for perhaps 2 minutes, no longer, long enough. The mother stood without moving for most of it, her pale eyes on me with that quality of attention I'd spent months trying to understand and finally stopped trying to categorize. It wasn't the assessment of threat, it wasn't the tolerance of a habituated animal. It wasn't anything I had a clean name for, it was recognition. That's the closest word I have. She turned first. One smooth, unhurried movement back toward the tree line, and the 4 followed her the way the young follow their mothers, not because they're told, but because the direction she moves is simply the direction that makes sense. One by one they entered the trees and the forest took them back, that dense winter cover closing around them, until there was nothing left but the places in the snow where they'd stood. The last to go was the mother. She paused at the tree line, just for a moment, 2 seconds, 3, and turned back. The same eyes. The same direct, unwavering look from that first night in the storm. But I knew the difference now between what I'd seen then and what I was seeing now. That night she'd looked at me with everything she had left, which was almost nothing, pouring the last of it into a single desperate ask directed at the only available thing. That was need, that was urgency, that was a mother at the absolute edge of what she could carry alone. This was something else entirely. This was arrival, completion, the look of something that had come back not because it had to but because it wanted to close the circle properly. Then she turned and walked into the forest, and was gone. I stood on the road for a long time after. The snow had started again, light, almost imperceptible, the kind that falls straight down in still air and accumulates in the folds of your jacket without you noticing. The mountain was quiet around me. The trees held their weight of snow without complaint. I thought about the night I'd found her, the way I'd almost driven past, the way a single moment of attention, 1/2 second of noticing something I could easily have not noticed, had pulled me out of the long comfortable numbness I'd been living inside, and set off a chain of events that I was still, standing here in the snow, sorting through the meaning of. I hadn't been looking for anything that night. I hadn't been looking for anything in years. There's a thing that happens to people who spend too long alone and call it preference. The solitude becomes a kind of expertise. You get very good at not needing things. You mistake the absence of longing for the presence of peace. You build a life that is functional and quiet and controlled, and requires very little from you emotionally, and you tell yourself that this is wisdom, that this is what you earned from all the things that hurt you, that the distance you keep from everything is the same as being safe. And then something grabs your glove in a snowstorm, and holds on. I picked up the camera on the drive home. Not to shoot anything specific. The light was fading and the road was empty and there was nothing framed and ready in the way that makes a photographer stop and raise the lens by reflex. I just picked it up and held it. I called my daughter when I got to the cabin. She picked up on the second ring, same as always. "How was the drive?" she said. "Good," I said. "Something happened. I want to tell you about it." "Tell me," she said, and I did. I still drive that road. Not every week, not with any fixed intention or hope of repeating what happened. Wild animals don't make appointments. The mountain doesn't arrange itself for your benefit. I know this. I've always known this. But I drive it because it's part of my route now, part of the territory I move through, part of the landscape that I look at instead of past. Sometimes I stop at the embankment and stand in the cold for a few minutes, just to stand there, just to remember what it felt like to almost drive by. That Manul cat grabbed my glove in the snow that night, and I thought I was saving her life. I thought I was the one doing the rescuing. I thought I understood the transaction. I was wrong about most of it. She pulled me out of the drift just as surely as I pulled her out of hers. This half-frozen, barely breathing, impossibly determined small animal who had no language for what she needed and found another way to ask for it anyway. She led me back to the mountains. She led me back to my daughter. She led me step by patient step through the snow, back to myself, and then she went home, the way all wild things eventually do, the way I was finally beginning to understand I was allowed to as well. Snow drifts softly across the silent forest. The tire tracks on the mountain road fill slowly in the new fall. The trees hold their quiet. Somewhere above the tree line, in the clean cold air of the high mountain winter, 5 Pallas's cats move through the world they were made for, alive, together, home. I thought that Manul cat was dying in the snow that night, but somehow she brought me back to life too.